Alan Towndrow. I'm a 3D animator and rigger at Bomper Studio. I've been animating professionally for about 3.5 years now. I started at Jellyfish Pictures in London. I worked on Dennis and Nasher, which is a TV show. From there, I moved to Bomper Studio, which is a lot smaller, small studio in Wales. We were creating the studio's first 3D character animated content. This was a great experience, but during production, I noticed there was a need for an in-house rigger. So once production finished, I started learning to rig. Around about that same time, our company decided we were going to create a short film. And I was given the opportunity to create the Colin rig for Coffee Run. Alongside the production of Coffee Run, we were working on multiple other projects that also required rigging. One of the first things I then had to rig was a cart. It used all of the principles that I'd learned rigging the characters beforehand and developing the coffee rig. And it was a perfect time to test whether I could rig in a production situation. I then moved on to rigging a hand, and eventually we created a short piece for Levi's where I got to rig Hello Kitty. This was a lot of fun, and it was the first biped character that I rigged in production. At this point, no one had seen Coffee Run, and I was really excited to show people how much I progressed. For me, learning to rig was a different process for someone learning rigging without any production experience. I'd already been animating for a couple of years, and I really knew what I wanted from the coffee rig. We knew I wanted to be cartoony, and I knew this would really push my rigging skills. So we're going to go over how to rig a cartoon character in Cinema 4D. Now, it's not going to be a complete head-to-toe tutorial on how to rig, because you can find those kind of tutorials online. This is more about how to think about rigging, how to tackle problem solving, and the core elements behind what built up the coffee rig. So the main things are IK and FK systems that we're then utilizing bendy limbs. And when we move up onto the face, we're using all of these like core principles that we're using on the body. And it's really just a process of problem solving and finding out what works for you. I really didn't get it right first time. I often overcomplicated a lot of things. Since doing the coffee rig, I've had a chance to strip it back a little bit and take out some objects. However, there is definitely some optimization that can still be done. So problem solving in your rig is really going to become useful. Not just when you're creating it, because you'll think of an idea of how you want your rig to act and behave, and then you've got to figure out a way to use a tool within the software to make it do this function. And there are going to be loads of options, and the right option is just whatever works for you. And you're just going to keep on finding better and better ways to do it, and quicker. Once you get past the scary aspect of there being a huge object manager full of things with different names and numbers and constraints, once you get past all of that, then you're opening yourself up to creating more character-driven work within your production pipeline. And this is what we did at Bomper Studio. We finished our coffee run animation, and since then we've had multiple projects come in. And it really is the hard work of the team that's just created like this crazy little animation that we thought of, I don't even know, a year and a half ago.
One of the first and most important things to consider when building your rig is organisation. Having a strong naming convention and good referencing system really helps. Over here, you can see I have all the different assets and different layers. So let's turn off the mesh and see what's underneath. To do this, I navigate over to the layer manager. I can then click and drag to disable the visibility tags. The rig is built up of an IK leg using a bendy limb system, a bendy spine that is able to switch from IK to FK, and a bendy limb arm, also with IK-FK match. An IK system gives us control translating the hand. The elbow direction is then controlled with the pole. We can also swap our orientation. An IK system can really be useful if the character is pushing an object or leaning against a wall. For this, we'd put it in global space. The hand will not be affected by the body. However, if we switch to local space, it will follow the transformations of the body. Our IK-FK match means that the animator can switch mid-shot. FK is a system that relies purely on rotations. We can still translate out some controls, but we'll be unable to translate the hand and have the rest of the arm follow. We'll go into the FK system a little later. Finally, the face. The face is mostly built up of joints, however is a hybrid system and utilises some blend shapes. Lastly, the tie, the FK chain and the collar. Now let's get to the basics. Cinema uses a hierarchy system. Everything is always a parent or a child. Okay, so I'm going to create a new scene and show you a bit of the basics behind rigging. I created a cube and then control click and drag to copy. I'm going to grab the cube and make it a child of the other one by dragging and dropping. We can then select the cube, translate and rotate, and the child will follow. You can then move the child in space and it will maintain its offset. There are many ways to create this parent-child relationship. The obvious being within the object manager, where an object is a physical child of its parent. The other way to create these relationships is through a constraint. Here we can create permanent or temporary bonds to other assets throughout the hierarchy. Lastly, you can drive an object's coordinates through an expresso tag. Next, we'll look at the importance of joint placement. Your joint is your access point. Where you place it will define how your geometry deforms. A badly placed joint will create collapsing and stretching in the wrong places. The most important thing to do is look at anatomy and see where things rotate from, and then apply this anatomy to your caricatured geometry. Then go up to the display tab. I like to turn on quick shading lines when placing my joints. They give me a better understanding of topology and where the modeler intended the joint to be. The bendy limbs on the Colin rig are built up of IK splines. When you create your IK spline system, you need to control its driving nulls. For this, it was really important to be able to average the distance between different controls. For this one being the elbow and the hand. This means no matter where we move the elbow, these controls will always point at either end and average their distance between them. Create a nice stretch and squash. Okay, so I'm just going to open a new scene, create a cube, control click and drag it across to copy it. If we want cube to average its distance 50% from 1 to 2, we use a PSR constraint. To create a constraint, I right click on the cube inside the object manager. I then navigate up to character tags and click constraint. PSR constraint can be really useful when you're rigging. One of its uses can be snapping one object to another. What the PSR constraint does is copy the position, scale and rotation values from one object to another. You can add multiple objects in and average the distance between them. I have two bendy controls running down the arm, so I average the distance using different values to better represent where I wanted the control to be. My control also has an aim constraint and an up vector. My aim constraint is to ensure the control is always pointing at either the elbow or the hand to maintain its correct orientation when you're moving the controls around. The up vector is then used to stabilize its final rotation in B. I have it always pointing at this null underneath my driving IK elbow. Here you can see how this control works and how useful it is creating extreme cartoony shapes. Using a simple cube setup, I'll show you how this control maintains its positioning. Let's add our aim constraint. We then go into our aim tab to add another object. We then change that to Z- in axis and drag and drop our cubes into our aim. We then go back to our constraint tag and select up vector, going in Y+ along the axis of Z. We can then create a null to drag and drop underneath our up vector, and then drag it out so it has something to point at. You can then control the Y rotation. This object will always be pointing at one of the two boxes. How I used it on my character was to imagine this cube as the elbow and this cube as the hand control. This can be our middle bendy limb. Now we want independent control of our bendy limb. We do this by adding a group. We want our constraint to be on the group above. Now we have independent control of this cube, while it still averages the distance between either cube. You can see the cube is always pointing up at that up vector. In an FK system, I'd attach the up vector to the elbow control. I found it really useful to use this method. A great example using this system in a more complex way is looking at the mouth. The bottom lip has 3 children, 3 tweaker lip controls. Our outer tweaker then averages the distance between the inner and outer controls. Now we've had a look at the different types of constraints, let's have a look at the IK and FK systems we can build. The system that I use for IK uses an adjustable height elbow. I developed this following the Delano Atheus cartoon character tutorial. The IK and the FK system drive the skinned objects, which are bendy IK splines. I use this system for the legs, the arms, and the body. So let's have a look how this is set up. We use our joint tool, control click, to place our joints. I make sure to keep freezing my transforms as I go, and make sure all my joints are aligned. So what we want is an IK and an FK system. So let's copy that joint over. Shift select all 3 joints in the FK joint chain. We then alt click on our pen tool to circle. In the attribute manager, reduce the size of the radius and change your plane so it aligns along the Z axis. We then go back to our joints, select them, right click, constraint, and select PSR. We can then drop on our splines into our PSR constraints. We then go in and organize and rename our assets. I start controls with naming convention CM, and then go on to rename my FK and IK joint chains. You can do this by double clicking over the text and just typing out your new name. For an IK tag, right click on your lowest joint, character tags, IK. Choose our end joint, add a goal, and create a pole. Drag the pole out. This is your elbow. Goal is your hand. Now we've created our 2 nulls. Let's click on them, go to the attribute manager, and change their shape and radius. In some systems, like the spine, I won't use a pole. Let's move our 2 IK controls up to the top with our FK controls and Alt-G to group them and rename. It's good to keep everything organized. So this is a standard IK system and a standard FK system. We now want to create an adjustable heighted elbow for the IK system. For this, we want to snap to axis. Start out at the shoulder and go to the elbow, and create a new joint chain from the wrist back to the elbow. Now we've created our 2 new joint chains. Let's move them down to the other IK system. We can group all these together, call them our IK system. Now we have our forearm and our upper arm, our bicep. For cartoony actions, we want to make sure our arm can stretch. Let's go back to our IK tag. Go down to stretch and squash and allow stretch. Select all and use Alt-G to group. We can then rename the selection to bendy limb. Now let's constrain our upper and lower joints for our adjustable heighted elbow. Let's right click on the root null, click constraint and parent. We can then scroll down and select our target, which is our hand. We'll then do for the same for the other end of the adjustable heighted elbow. Parent constraining it to our first IK joint. We know this has an expression of 0, so we want to increase the expression by 1. Our next step is to create IK systems. To do this, we right click, go up to character tags and IK. We add in our end joint. Now we must add our goals. We now need to start thinking about our adjustable heighted elbow. Let's create a new null, GRP bendy elbow. Let's constrain this to our IK elbow. We can automatically snap it with a PSR and increase the expression of 1 as we have an expression of 0 on this IK control. We now have an object that's following our original IK elbow. We can put this into our IK controls. For my IK bendy elbow control, I go up to cube, click and hold and select null. I can then rename my null to IK bendy elbow. In the object tab, I change the display to cube and alter the size of the radius. We now have an object to put our 2 new IK goals inside. Control select the nulls and drag and drop them underneath our new control. Let's just make sure that both of our controls are able to stretch. To organize our files, let's create some layers. We right click in the layer manager, add new layer. We can then rename our layers, controls, hide and skin. To put our controls inside a new layer, we shift select them, right click and add to new layer. Now we're not actually skinning any of these objects, so the rest of our objects we can hide. It always helps to color code objects. To do this, navigate to the Basic tab in the Attribute Manager. You can then go down to Display Color and change your colors. Let's just go with 1 bendy bicep control and 1 forearm bendy control. Let's create 2 new nulls. We'll need 2 different PSR constraints to switch between IK and FK. To copy a constraint tag, just control, click and drag. Let's start with the IK constraints. We know we want to average the distance using 2 PSR constraints, not using rotation. We want to aim our constraint at our hand and our elbow. And we want to control its rotation using an up vector. First of all, we need to consider expressions. The hand control doesn't have a parent with a constraint, so it's an expression of 0. However, the elbow control is in a group with a constraint with the expression of 1. So we know our bendy control needs an expression of 2. Let's add our IK hand and our IK elbow. We also want to aim at our IK hand and our IK elbow. As for our up vector, we need to create a null. Let's have it follow the rotation of the IK arm. I'm just going to move our FK system out of the way. I'm going to navigate to my IK driving joints. I control click in the cube box, hold down and create a null. This drops it underneath where I need it in the hierarchy. Once we've created our null, we can then drag it out for our object to aim at. We rename it Bendy Aim IK. Later on, we'll have to copy this null and drop it into our FK system. Let's connect to our new Bendy IK aim. While we've got our averaging null selected, we can control click a circle spline. It will create the spline as a child and give it the same coordinates. We can then adjust the radius inside the object tab and then repeat the same process for the opposite side. We create our PSR, our aim, and our up vector. We constrain one PSR to the IK elbow and the other to our IK system. Make sure this is an expression of 2. Repeat this for the aim constraints. Create a new null to aim at. Move the null out and then rename your new objects. Let's then aim our control at our new null and create a new control. Scale this back up using the points if you need to. We can then rename our controls. I almost forgot. Let's just go back a few steps. So a great way to find out if your rig is working is to just undo moves. I just went to my hand control and saw that this joint was lagging. If I click, it'll catch up. This is what happens when you've got the wrong expression. So we know that it's this joint. Whatever's driving this joint is out. So we find that joint, and it's our IK joint. We look at the expression, it's an expression of 0. Well, I know that my IK joint has a goal. So let's find that goal. This goal is in a group with a PSR constraint with an expression of 1. So we know that this IK joint then needs to be increased an expression of 1 to make 2. For our IK FK switch, we're going to create a null. Let's go into the Object tab and change the display and the radius. We can then go up to User Data, add a group, and rename. Let's make a float slider. We just need to go 0 to 1. Now we can switch from IK to FK. We now have to link our user data using the Espresso tag. So right click on our null, Cinema 4D tags, and go down to Espresso. Just going to dock that here. To add our IKFK switch, we drag and drop it from the object manager into the Espresso editor. We can then drag and drop the slider from the attribute editor into our new node. What we want to switch between is our bendy limbs being constrained from our IK to our FK. We can then apply the same principle for the hand and also build in IK and FK space matching. We now have to set up our FK constraints. So we're using a PSR and we're adding another goal. We can then drag and drop our goals in. We're using the wrist and the elbow in our FK system. We then add our up vector and our aim constraint. Our aim is also aiming at the wrist and the elbow. So we just select those. We then go into our up vector. We need to copy this out of our IK system and drag and drop it underneath our FK elbow. One thing I noticed is that we haven't set up our FK controls. So we just need to make sure that each control is a child of the other. So the wrist being a child of the elbow and the elbow being a child of the shoulder. That's our shoulder our elbow, and our hand. Now we know our forearm aim wants to be a child of the elbow. We then select our new null as our up vector. We then want to do the same for our bicep bendy limb. We add our PSR, our up vector, and our aim, and start constraining it to the shoulder and the elbow control. An expression of 0 will be fine at the moment, as our controls don't rely on any constraints. Again, let's copy our up vector over to our FK system. From underneath our shoulder control, just rename these IK to FK. Finally, let's set up our last up vector by dragging and dropping it in underneath the target, and our FK constraints are now all set up. I'm now going to create a result node to find out the value coming out of our IK-FK switch. I go into export and just type in result, and then drag and drop it into the X group. To link up our new nulls, we drag and drop from our new output and input. This will create the connection within the Expresso editor. We also want a range mapper. We want to reverse anything coming out of there. This means our result can change to 1. Let's drag and drop our IK constraints into our Expresso editor. We can then click on the input blue tab, go down to basic properties, and click enable. So we know that when our IK switch is on IK, it's giving out a result of 0. We then connect up our IK constraints to a range mapper to make sure that when it's switched to IK, it's getting a result of 1 and being turned on. We can then drag and drop our FK constraints into the Expresso editor. We know that our IK is connected to our range mapper, so let's connect it straight up to the switch. This means it will be receiving a value of 0 when the IK-FK switch is on IK, and a value of 1 when it is in FK, turning it on. Here you can see our bendy control following, and we switch. Now our bendy control is following our IK arm. Perfect. You can use this same method for the hand. Switch between your IK and FK controllers with a constraint. Before we move on, let's have a look at IK and FK space match. Using this system is relatively simple. What we want to do is to create constraints on our controls. It doesn't matter on the expression, as they'll be running in the background while we move the control objects. These will be PSR constraints, as we want them to snap in place. Now, the hand is relatively simple, the same with the elbow. We can get them to match. What we need next is something for our elbow to constrain to, and think about where our IK and FK biceps are constrained to. So, let's create a new null with the same coordinates as our elbow spline. We'll need to match this in our FK system. To copy the elbow null over, I select, control, and drag into my FK system. I can then rename it and add our PSR constraint. So let's constrain one to the other. We can do this to the hand, the elbows, finally constrain the shoulder to the original IK, and create a new null to constrain back. We now need to switch between each of these constraints and change the visibility of our IK and FK controls. What we want is that when our FK system is not in use, we want it to be constrained to the IK controls. So let's start dropping our constraints in. We drag and drop the constraints into the Expresso editor. can then click on the Input tab, and under Basic Properties, allow Enable. To keep everything neat, I'm going to create a new node network. I control click and drag a node to copy it over. So we know we've got a result of 0, so it's in IK, which means we want our constraints enabled. To enable our constraint, let's connect the output from the range mapper to the input on our constraints. Oh, I forgot one last one. That's our elbow pull. Now we want to move on to our IK system. So let's drop our constraints in there. Let's start with a hand. Elbow, elbow pull, finally the group above our IK system. Let's enable these constraints and connect them straight up to our IK-FK switch. Now we've got our constraints sorted, let's change the visibility of our controls. We control drag and drop to copy our IK-FK switch over. We can then drag and drop the top IK and FK control nodes into our Espresso editor. On our input, we go to Basic Properties and go down to Visibility in Editor. We can then control drag and drop our range mapper and connect it up to our other system. It looks like I got that the wrong way around, so I'm just switching them around. We now have a system that should match our IK and FK. Now we have our IK-FK switch. Let's move on to our IK splines. To draw out our spline, let's go to an orthographic view. In Pen Tool and with Axis Snap-On, we control click and drag to create a spline with a handle. We can then do this along our different controls, creating a nice arc. To create joints along the spline, we go to our Joint tool and control click. Don't worry too much about the spacing, this is something we can figure out later. We now want to create our IK spline tag. We add this to the first joint in the chain. Right click, character tags, and then go to IK spline. Let's add our spline, let's add our end joint, go for twisting, world. We can now go to our handles tab. We know we want to create as many handles as we have controls. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Next, let's create objects. Let's group this and call it IK spline. Moving back to our IK spline tag, let's change the type to equal. Let's start dropping our driving nulls underneath the parents. Let's start with the bendy limbs, as they're already switching between our IK and FK system and we won't have to create a switch on the new nulls. We just drag and drop this underneath our bendy limb and rename. I can then tear off a new object manager to make dragging and dropping more easy. There's a button in the top right corner with a plus on it. This will copy your object manager. You can then dock it in your layout. So we know that our average in control has an expression of 2. It will be driving our IK spline. So we want to go back to our IK spline and set the expression to 3. Now we're down to our last 3 driving nulls. We will need these to switch between IK and FK. Let's rename the nulls so we can keep organized. Let's add constraints to all 3 of these so we can switch between IK and FK. I can see that our hand drive spline has a very similar orientation to our hand control. So let's just go ahead and PSR constrain that straight away. Let's check that our hand goal doesn't have a constraint that will make us change the expression. It looks like we're all good. Next is the elbow. Let's check that too. That has an expression of 1, which means the next one must have an expression of 2. This elbow null has a different orientation as this elbow spline. Let's create a null inside the elbow control. We want to snap it. We do this using a PSR tag. We can then delete the PSR tag and rename. NL. We can then constrain to our new null. Finally, our shoulder. Luckily this has the same orientation as our joint, so let's constrain that. We know that this joint is an IK system with an expression of 2. So we need an expression of 3, and we constrain. We're now driving our IK spline. Now let's switch. Go over to FK, start constraining. Again, we'll need to create a null to match our elbow drive spline. PSR constrain that to our elbow drive spline. And you can delete your PSR constraint, freeze the coordinates, and we're good to parent it to our new locator. Finally, connect our bicep spline. We can then add these constraints to our Espresso tag. For one last time, I'm control clicking and dragging over the IKFK switch, the range mapper, and I'm going to drag and drop in my constraints. Now we need to set up the IKFK switch. We then want to drag and drop the weight value of our constraints onto the input of our new constraint nulls. This is how we'll flip between our different goals. I'm now going to go back into my constraint and check the weights. It looks like I've got them the wrong way around, so I'm just going to unplug them in my Espresso editor and swap the results around. I then want to repeat this process for the remaining constraints. So let's see if this worked. Looks like it's working to me. And switch. Great. So let's go back slightly. In this bendy limb, we've now set up an FK system. If your animation requires just FK, then there's no reason to make it more complicated. Just use your simple FK system. And if you need IK, just use the IK system. You don't have to make it as complicated as this. If you're not doing cartoony animation, there's no need to put in this adjustable elbow. Now, if you want to use this IK FK system, you'll need a set of joints that you're going to be using as your skinning joints. Now, we can start stripping some of this out. We don't need our FK joint system, as we only need our FK controls. We can also get rid of our extra IK systems. We only need that if we're using an IK system without the spline controls. Let's put everything inside our bendy limb. Freeze all our coordinates. We can add all of these to hide. Add our spline to hide.
I hope you enjoyed my presentation and you feel inspired to use some of the rigging tools inside Cinema 4D and start creating some more character-driven work. Now, we've gone over some of the basics from IK to FK to creating bendy limbs and then using the IK spline system, which really is at the core of the bendy limbs in the coffee rig. And hopefully you realised that from creating joints like FK systems and IK systems and IK splines, then you can use all of these principles within the face, creating different constraints with different hierarchies and different driven keys. Now, when you're creating your rigs, you don't have to make everything with the craziest IK splines and bendy limbs. You just have to make it work for your production. So I hope you use some of the systems that we went through today when setting up your characters. and really think about what you want from your character when creating it, and then how you can make that happen using these principles. I'm going to leave you with Bomper Studio Reel, a little look at what we've been working on, but keep your eyes peeled because we're about to release a few really cool projects using the fundamentals that we went over today in all of the rigs. And it's going to be exciting to see this come out of Cinema 4D, and I hope you enjoy it. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching my tutorial. So give them away. Goodbye. Goodbye, guys.